Steelers fans want to start an AFC North war by comparing Kenny Pickett already to Joe Burrow, and Kenny Pickett hasn't even taken a snap in the NFL. We'll talk about that comparison, some other things said by Kenny Pickett's quarterback coach, and some more depth talk on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on this video. If you enjoy it, hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus episodes with breaking news updates and more. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Joining me as usual, when we have him on the show every week. We had him earlier in the week, so it feels like it's been a long time since we've had Josh on, because we had him on last Monday, and we switched it up so he wasn't on Thursday, but he's back on the Thursday episode. What's up, Josh?
It feels like I got moved around in the pitching rotation. Like the All-Star break came, so I had to get my last start in for the All-Star break, and then it was like that whole week that happened, and then everything kind of resets. So like I'm back in my normal spot in the rotation, but I'm ready to go 8-9 innings. Let's go.
There we go. Let's start with a topic that I didn't want to address right away because I didn't feel like it was pressing. But now that we've gotten through, Ogunjobi and some other things that have gone on with the Steelers, I do want to talk about a comment made by LeSean McCoy on a podcast where they were talking to Chase Claypool, and he started to talk about Kenny Pickett. Now, anyone who knows LeSean McCoy, you know that he is a Pitt man, so he's going to have his Pitt biases. But he not only compared Kenny Pickett to Joe Burrow, he basically said he is Joe Burrow. His skill set wise, everything wise, he's going to be what Joe Burrow is now. And
I don't see no difference, I believe is what he said.
I don't see no difference between the two. And that lit up a storm. Your compadres at 93.7 The Fan was harping on it. There've been a lot of people talking about it. And listen, it's June. It's about to be July. I get it. We gotta talk about stuff when it happens because it's crazy. But I did want to look at this a little bit closer. Now, interestingly enough, 93.7 The Fan had on Kenny Pickett's quarterback coach, Tony, and he said the comparisons to Joe Burrow are legit. The way they throw it, both accurate, both process the information so well, and they're ultra confident without being cocky. I will say this: if you limit it to that frame, both are leaders, both are accurate passers, both process the field at a high level, and both have this confidence, but don't come off like I'm the man, don't talk to me, like that kind of swagger. If you left it at that, I would agree with you. And I think the world of Kenny Pickett. I covered him for 2 years. I think that he was the best processor of the field in this college quarterback class. But I think you're getting way ahead of yourself if you're just ranking him up there already with Joe Burrow, when Joe Burrow, first year we saw some flashes, but he got beat up and everything. But second year he came out and he led the Bengals to the Super Bowl. And there were some moments there where he kind of struggled a little bit here and there. But all in all, he still was everything that he was meant to be as a first overall pick.
Yeah, it's interesting because I look at, and I'll preface it with this. I'm the same way you are. I remember Kenny Pickett starting that game against Miami and beating them.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing how he was after that game. He didn't look like anything big had happened.
Right.
He didn't look like the moment was too big for him, because there are some guys who will win big games, but you could see afterwards they're kind of like, okay, I didn't think this would end up being this big of a deal. The moment was never too big for Kenny Pickett, which I thought was really, really stark, considering the fact that it was the second season at Pitt when that happened. So it was a pretty interesting thing to notice or observe at the time. And as things went along, and he met challenges over those next couple years, and he faced them, but even then, the moment never got too big for him. So he comes back for his last season. He leads Pitt on that run that we saw them go on. They won the Coastal. They get over the hump and win the ACC. And that's exactly what he set out to do. That was the thing I liked the most about Kenny Pickett. He said, look, our goal is to come back here, win a division, win the conference. He called his shot, and they did it. And after that, he's like, all right, I'm done. Did what I came to do, which I respected. And it was another one of those things that was, he was confident, but not too cocky. And the thing I liked the most about it was always we messaging. It was always, we did this. We did everything right. If they lost, we didn't get it together. We got to fix it. And that was the thing I liked, because it reminded me a lot of a certain Steeler who's the leader of that team now, and Cam Hayward. Cam Hayward uses a lot of the same messaging. That's what I liked about Kenny Pickett. And it's also something I liked about Joe Burrow, because Joe Burrow never made it about him. It was we. If we won, we did everything we needed to do today. If we lost, we needed to do better. But then again, Joe Burrow in that last season at LSU, they didn't lose. So that was kind of the deal.
It was easy to be we.
It was easy to be we because
be French and everything over there.
But they kind of blew everybody away. But bringing it back to the center of things, I agree with you. When you were keeping it down to the technical aspects, okay, they have similar arm strength. They can both make certain throws. They use the same hip rotation when they go to throw the ball. If you're using stuff like that, like a lot of the pre-draft evaluation was, because pre-draft NFL.com compared Kenny Pickett to maybe a little bit of a lesser version of Joe Burrow. He maybe wasn't a 1.0. He might have been maybe a 2.5, but he was still compared to Joe Burrow pre-draft, just on basis of some of the pedigree and the fundamental things. So I'm with you on that. If you want to leave it there, fine. But that's where it ends for me, because when you're trying to add everything else into the equation, we haven't gotten there yet for Kenny Pickett. And not to mention the fact, if we're talking about the on-field stuff, it's kind of not fair, because Kenny Pickett with Pitt in 2021 was nothing like LSU with Joe Burrow. That team with Joe Burrow, they were playing Road to Glory. They were playing Road to Glory on freshmen. Kenny Pickett might have been playing on All-American. The difficulty level was a lot different for Pitt than it was for LSU. That's all I'm saying there.
For the video game nor football nerds out there, he's talking about some NCAA football. A game that will be back soon, so we're happy about that.
It's coming back.
But that's so basically saying that, like, Joe Burrow was on easy mode when he was in LSU.
He was on rookie.
To compare them, Joe Burrow completed 76.3% of his 527 passes for 5,671 yards, 60 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. That's a 10-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. Kenny Pickett completed 67.2% of his 497 passes. That is a legitimate 9% difference, over 9% difference in favor of Joe Burrow. And he threw 42 touchdowns to Joe Burrow's 60 and 4,319 yards to Joe Burrow's 5,671. And again, 6 interceptions. Kenny threw 7 interceptions to Joe Burrow's 6 with all those more attempts.
And Joe Burrow, go look at what Joe Burrow did against Oklahoma in the college football playoff.
Yeah, geez, there was
Kenny Pickett didn't have an Oklahoma game,
right?
Kenny
Pickett had some light him up moments.
He had some light him up games, but not an Oklahoma game.
Big stages, Joe Burrow also showed up. And here's the thing: like, Kenny Pickett is a guy and Pat Narduzzi often said this, and I often wrote this about it. Kenny Pickett's a guy that if you're in college football, you wanted him in your huddle, because he was going to go to war with you, and he was going to give you everything he had, and he was going to work as hard as he could to be the best that he can be on the field, and even be the best on the field. But again, maybe this is part of the opportunity that's there, because Kenny Pickett did have Jordan Addison. It wasn't like Pitt didn't have a lot of talent on last year.
And a veteran offensive line.
A veteran offensive line, a trio of running backs, good backup weapons, and a defense that was just causing havoc. And they won the ACC. Granted, LSU's team was like that, but in the SEC and crushing everybody and didn't lose.
Yeah, they stopped the SEC that year.
Right. So there's a difference there. I will say another comparison that I do think people overlook is their rise in the rankings of everything, because going into 2019. Joe Burrow wasn't that guy. And remember, he transferred to LSU from Ohio State because he couldn't beat out, I think it was Dwayne Haskins, actually.
Couldn't beat Dwayne Haskins out, yeah.
And so he got a chance as a junior, played in 13 games or so, threw 16 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, blew nobody out of the water. Everyone was kind of like, okay, Joe Burrow, whatever. And then in his last year, he explodes for 5,600 for all those yards in what some say is the greatest quarterback season of a college football player. Kenny Pickett was trusted in Pitt and loved in Pitt before his final year with the Panthers. But his counts were 12 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He actually had back-to-back 13-9 touchdown to interception games. Wes Euler. I got to get my WVU digs in, man. The brawl's only a couple months away. But literally, Kenny Pickett had back-to-back 13 touchdown, 9 interception seasons. Again, I still think that's a professional Pitt move on the part of Kenny Pickett to troll West Virginia. But in his final year, all those numbers skyrocketed up. He had never thrown more than 3,100 yards, and then he goes and throws 4,300, over 4,300 in his final season with 42 touchdowns. He had never thrown more than 13 in a season. So those two took just skyrocketing rises in their final years in their college team. I want to talk more about this comparison and also more about some important things that aren't necessarily on the field things, and even some that are on the field. But I want to talk about more of this comparison in just a bit here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about rockauto.com. You can save time and money on your vehicle when you need to get it fixed or make some changes by visiting rockauto.com. You can end up spending 30%, 50%, even 100% more on the same car parts if you go to a chain store or a car dealership over Rock Auto. For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump is worth $353 in the chain store, but at Rock Auto, it's just $216. Rock Auto is a family-owned business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every customer, and they have everything you can need from brake parts to tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution for your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Be sure to write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Josh Taylor. We're continuing this talk about Joe Burrow and Kenny Pickett. And listen, if there's a Bengals fan out there that's listening, like this is a craziness. I do feel like this is over the top. Like we're with you in that sense. Now, if you out here saying that Kenny Pickett will never be nothing, okay, calm down. We ain't going that far. But I'm saying right now, it's unfair for Joe Burrow to say dang, Joe, you just did all that. And we're just saying this college guy is going to replace you. But I also think it's unfair to Kenny to put those expectations on him before he's even taken a snap in a preseason game. He hasn't even put full pads on in the NFL, and we're doing this to him. And I think, especially with, he's most likely not going to start this year. It's going to be Mr. Trubisky, and Joe Burrow was doing it immediately because he was that guy. He was first overall. Kenny 20th overall. There are some legitimate, just if you're looking at profiles where Kenny Pickett does take a step back from Joe Burrow. Again, accuracy, sure. Seeing the field, sure. Leadership, seems to say the right things at the right times and to be that guy, sure. But there's still parts of Joe Burrow's game where you can see that he reaches different parts of the field and has had higher success than Kenny Pickett.
I keep having to tell my colleagues at 93.7 The Fan, I have to keep reminding them, it's June.
Right. Let's
stop overreacting about a quarterback that was drafted literally 2 months ago in June. Can we get to training camp and see how he does in 11-on-11 in training camp first? Can we see how that goes? Can we see how he does in 7 shots in Latrobe? Can we see how that goes before we start putting labels and expectations on people? We are going to put that guy on the moon before they even take off from Cape Canaveral. It's crazy. I say all that to say this. Yes, do I expect Kenny Pickett can latch on with this team and become a very successful quarterback? I do. I do for a couple different reasons, but one of them is because of his own ability, like you talked about, his leadership ability, like you talked about, which also I think is really important, that Cam Hayward, who I talked about previously being the leader of this team, after Kenny Pickett was drafted, Cam Hayward said, I'm putting his locker right next to mine.
And he literally did.
Like
They're right next to each other.
I love that. And the other thing I loved about it was because it kind of took me back to when Kenny Pickett was at Pitt, because Kenny Pickett also had a pretty close relationship with the leaders on defense at Pitt as well. I thought that was important because those guys in the defensive backfield, those veteran guys, they had a very good chemistry. They had a very good relationship. They got along well too, and they all absorbed the role together as leaders of the team. It's offense versus defense in practice, but when we get together, it's all of us. And I think that is carried over beautifully from one side of the building to the other.
Mike Tomlin talked about how impressed he was about that. And it's come out like the Steelers, they didn't take Kenny Pickett out. Like this was absolutely like the thing that they just kind of hid under the blanket and just said, we hope that nobody really lifts this up and actually looks at Kenny Pickett and and talks to Pat Narduzzi and all these people, like, to get a background on who he is. Because the Steelers saw him for 5 years. They didn't need to take him to dinner. They didn't need to learn all about him, to call his mom. They've been looking at this man for years. They know.
If you believe what they told you, they talk to him pretty frequently.
Exactly.
In the building, they'd see each other, and they've developed a relationship over time.
Exactly. It's part of it's one of the benefits, again, that Pitt boasts about their training facilities. Saying like, hey, we literally practice right next to the Steelers. When you're done working out, you can come out and watch the Steelers work and work on that and build those relationships if you want. And Kenny Pickett, that was to his advantage with the Steelers, because they were able to see all the things that he did. And to your point, Tomlin said, by name, he said Kenny Pickett, Damar Hamlin. They brought those two sides of the team together, and that made Pitt a much more together locker room and together team. And now you're seeing that the exploits of that. I really think that there's that leadership component that's needed on the Steelers' future right now. And a lot of Bengals fans feel that Joe Burrow is here, and now the time of losing is done, and this is their time. They're going to take their step forward and be one of the crown jewels of the NFL for the next 10, 20 years, however long Joe Burrow is in his prime with the team. But and again, I'm not saying that Kenny Pickett's on Joe Burrow's level right now. I think someday he might get there. And that's the thing. I'm not discounting Kenny from having the potential. I'm saying right now it's crazy to say it. But I am saying that leadership-wise, what I saw him do at Pitt is if he's able to do that while being just a decent quarterback, like Kenny Pickett to me doesn't have to be, Josh Allen. He doesn't have to be Tom Brady. If he's just above average, if he's he's a proficiently good quarterback, and I think the Steelers can continue to build around him, give him a better offensive line, give him a strong running game, give him some talented receivers, and that leadership component will do wonders. And it's something that, Josh, you've talked a lot about that they've been missing with Ben Roethlisberger, that there's ways that Ben Roethlisberger led. I saw him in some training camps dig into Ryan Swister and dig into Eli Rogers and work with some guys to make them better than what they were before he got there. Ben had his leadership components, but he also threw teammates under the bus. He also did things that kind of made you say, whoa, wait a second there. And we saw that kind of play out sometimes. We saw him be at odds with people. And we saw him, in the media for not good things. And Kenny Pickett's never had anything like that. And he had 5 years at Pitt where he could have blamed all sorts of things on other guys. He was getting lit up. He was getting hit. He never did those things. If Kenny Pickett can be that leader that carries the torch for the Steelers, and again, Cam Hayward's working with him directly, to teach him in those ways, I think that is worth a whole lot to what the Steelers, and especially Mike Tomlin, are trying to do with this next generation of Steelers.
I'm going to throw out three things here, and I'll try to keep them all as brief as possible.
There we go.
The first thing is I'm going to take a step back. We'll go right back to the I Am Athlete podcast with Shady McCoy and Claypool. We look at what Shady McCoy said, but we don't talk enough about what Chase Claypool said, which I thought was one of the more lucid things that was brought up in that discussion. He said, look, this is a guy who can come and make plays, move out of the pocket. He can use his feet. He can throw on the run. He brings an athleticism to this offense the same way Joe Burrow does to the Bengals, which I think is true. And he says, look, Joe Burrow is a guy who can, he said a lot of times, when T. Higgins and the other receiver for Cincinnati,
Tyler Boyd, Jamar Chase.
Thank you. He said when those guys got open downfield, it's because Joe Burrow was able to use his feet and get open and help those guys get open and make plays by maybe buying an extra second or two, getting out of the pocket or moving around and letting those guys get open. And he said Kenny Pickett's capable of doing the same thing. And I think that's absolutely true. Because we look at the thing that Shady said, we're like, oh, I can't believe he said that. But we ignore what Chase Claypool said that brought us really right back down to earth and was rooted in a lot more fact and rooted in a lot more basic fundamentalist knowledge. And that made sense to me. The second thing I'm going to bring up, we always talk about quarterback evaluation and stuff like that. One of the oldest tests that we've seen over the years as far as evaluating quarterbacks, and it's still used to this day, even though said coach has since moved on from the NFL, the Parcells test was something we've heard for a long time, right? Chris, I was saying on my radio show back in December, hey, don't forget, Kenny Pickett passes the Parcells test. All 7 things. 3 years as a starter. Is he a senior? Did he graduate? Did he start 30 games? Did he win 23 of those 30 games? The touchdown to interception ratio at least 2-1, completion percentage over 60%. All of the answers to those questions was yes. As a matter of fact, of all the quarterbacks that came out in the past draft, only 2 met that criteria, him and Desmond Ridder. So that sticks out to me with Kenny Pickett. But there was always another element of it that wasn't talked about as much. How mature was he? How intelligent was he? How good of a leader is he? That's another thing. Those are some of the more, not as obscure things that Bill Parcells looked at in quarterbacks. And Kenny Pickett possesses those things too. He possesses the intangible parts, not just the numerical or the, tallying part of the Parcells test. All that sticks out to me. To your point, I don't need Kenny Pickett to go out and be a world beater, because the way the Steelers are going to be built this season, they're going to be built around a defense that's very aggressive and forces turnovers, and a running game with a really athletic guy who's also being nudged by Mike Tomlin and Cam Hayward to be a leader in Najee Harris. So you have those 2 guys, Najee Harris and Kenny Pickett. If they can grow into leadership together and be equally productive, one of them doesn't have to be above and beyond better than anybody else at their position. They can both be really good and efficient and make this offense work together. And if the defense can play to at least a level that's somewhat passable, now this team looks a lot better by proxy instead of just focusing on 2 or 3 guys. The third thing that I'm going to bring up, and I thought this was really important as the season went along, and you mentioned this also, like the relationship that he had with the Steelers. I'm glad that when he got the opportunity to talk at minicamp, he didn't talk about what hadn't happened yet. Right. He said, look, I just got here. I was expecting to be the number 3 guy. I wasn't expecting to get any special treatment. I wasn't expecting to be thrust into that because I literally just got here. He is not putting himself anywhere further than where he is. He is keeping himself incredibly humble. He's keeping himself to a workman mentality. All I'm working on is getting better and being in good shape coming up for the season. You know who else talked like that when he first got to Pittsburgh after being drafted in the first round? A guy named TJ Watt. And I know that because he said it to me personally over and over again. I'm just worried about being in shape for the season. I'm just worried about getting better. I'm just worried about being ready to get on the field and do what I have to do with this group. That's all he talked about. That's what Kenny Pickett is saying. When you hear things like that, similar things being said from players, that's stuff I look for, and that's stuff I'm paying attention to. And that's what I like about Kenny Pickett.
It's a one thing, and that's who he is all the time.
The time.
Before he was the man at Pitt, when he was the man at Pitt, and after he was the man at Pitt, you didn't hear that man take a thing for granted. I remember after every game, after he'd break Dan Marino's record, he'd do this, he'd do that. They'd win a huge game. They'd lock up the ACC, Coastal Division. And, I'd ask him, like, Kenny, like, is there a time where you step back? And he's like, nope, because we play this team next week. And nope, because we play this team next week. And then after they finally won the ACC championship, I said, okay, Kenny, you have accomplished your goal of being ACC champions. Are you going to take a breath now? He's like, I mean, maybe, because we get like a month off. He's like, I might go see my family and then I kind of let loose, but like, not really, because I'm still focused on whatever I'm doing next. And it's just like even then he was still like, I'm not so sure I'm going to take a step back and smell the roses and like, just look at your accomplishments and just be like, we did that.
Sounds like someone else we've heard from recently, doesn't it?
Who does that sound like?
Sounds like Mike Tomlin on the Pivot podcast when they kept asking him about his accomplishments, and he goes, I don't see comfort in those things. And here it cracks me up that people keep trying to decipher what Mike Tomlin is saying when they know what Mike Tomlin is saying. The problem is they can't shape it to what they want it to be so they can use it against him. But when he says things like, I don't take comfort in my accomplishments because it doesn't help me do my job tomorrow, it's a lot of the same ethos that Kenny Pickett had. Yeah, I can go back and lean on this and be happy about it, but I got to go take care of this tomorrow. We got to work on this for next week. We got this most important thing coming up, which, by the way, Pitt fans used to get on James Franklin for saying the most important game is the next game. Kenny Pickett said it all the time while he was at Pitt, and everyone loved it. It's funny how when the message comes from another mouth, it's a bad thing. No, that's the best way to look at it. And even by the end of that season, even Pat Narduzzi was saying it, Chris. And I'm like, Pat Narduzzi gets it. The most important game is the next game. And Kenny Pickett was saying it all along. So all of those things, when you wrap it all up, there's a reason why this team likes this guy so much, because he represents a lot of this stuff they want their players to represent, both inside the huddle and off the field.
Again, lots of things to like about Kenny Pickett, his demeanor, how he carries himself. I think those things can carry him far into the NFL if he gets a shot. And again, it doesn't mean he has to be a starter this year. It just means he needs to take his time, develop, and then when it's time for him to get his start, be the best version that he can be of himself. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we got a caller question about depth on the team. We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, going to talk to you guys about betonline.net. Betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's Major League Baseball season. Remember, basketball's done, hockey's done, but guess what? Baseball's still in full swing, and you get a chance to put money down on it, learn all the best odds for you to make money on it by going to betonline.net, your continued source for all your sports wagering information from live betting, esports, playoffs, and more. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Josh Taylor, 93.7 The Fan, KDKA TV. Let's get into this next question now. There's a lot of questions about what the Steelers should do with their depth. Now, again, you look at what the situation that they're in now, because they don't have to pay Ben Roethlisberger. That sure, they paid T.J. Watt, they're paying Minkah Fitzpatrick, they're doing all those things, but this team has a good amount of cap space. And according to overthecap.com, they have about $14.3 million in cap space after, paying Minkah Fitzpatrick his money and getting Larry Ogunjobi. So they've made those moves. Now, there's still moves that could be made. And we had this caller, Jacob, call in with an idea for a cheaper move. Here's an idea from Jacob.
Hey, Chris, this is Jacob calling with another question. I wanted to know, I saw that the Titans recently waived Derwin Gray, and I know that that's somebody who's kind of lower on the depth chart that we ended up releasing on the waiver back in 2020, but it was still somebody that they did see a little bit of promise in. And with this, do you see the Steelers bringing him back in? They like to bring in the players that they've had in the past, Skipper, that just got re-signed. There's a bunch of other, examples of that. I think it's possible they might bring him back. He's a good depth piece on the offensive tackle. What do you think? Let me know.
Thank you, Jacob, for your call. It's a good question and a good point. The Steelers do often do that. Remember, y'all, when you're trying to get in touch with us and you're trying to get a question in, call 412-223-6644 and leave your name, where you're from, and what your question is. Keep it under a minute. And if you are international and you can't call that number, just email LOSteelersTopicBag@gmail.com and attach an MP3 of your question. And leave your information there so we can put it out there. But Jacob's question about Derwin Gray. One, he was waived. He's still a free agent. He is a guy who's played, swing tackle, worked his way up the Steelers after being a late round pick for them years ago. But here's my pushback on this, Josh. Is Derwin Gray, sure, like you can bring him in like you didn't bring in Tuzar Skipper. But I think the Steelers do need to seriously look at their depth at tackle, and they have money to play with. They've got $14.3 million. And maybe some of that money goes to Chris Boswell when they re-sign him. Maybe they're planning some other things, or maybe they're planning a trade. But in free agency right now, again, I'm excluding guys that are 33 and older. Like the Steelers don't go get those guys. But Darrell Williams, offensive tackle from the Bills, 30 years old. He's out there. Eric Fisher, 31. I think he's even a little on that side too of being that. But here's the thing. You're not asking any of these guys to be to be the superstar starters to hold it down. You're saying, hey, you're our answer if Dan Moore Jr. doesn't get it together this year, or if he gets hurt. And same thing for Chukwuma Okorafor. I also think it's reasonable to look at a guy like Tyrell Crosby, who I've talked about before. He hasn't played in since 2020, but he was a swing tackle who played both, and he's 26 years old. You could probably get him at a discount. I said this a while back, and granted, this move might not happen until middle of training camp, when the Steelers are, when they see, okay, this guy just doesn't have it this year, we need to get it. But I do think there needs to be more phone calls made about the depth at the tackle position, because they need to be prepared to put an offensive line out there that's going to be solid for Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett.
And for those who are watching on YouTube, if it looks like I keep looking off into the distance, I'm looking at a list of names here that I had on the monitor here of tackles. And my eyes lit up. You probably noticed because Chris mentioned Tyrell Crosby, because we discussed Tyrell Crosby a couple months ago. And he was guy that we both talked about who could be a good candidate for this team. First of all, I love Jacob's question because I thought that was a very well thought out question. And I got to point this out. Every time I'm on this show, it feels like we get a question from a different state or a different location.
Yep.
You guys are awesome. I love that. I love
Steeler
that
Nation
from all over the place. Steeler Nation is everywhere, and it is fantastic. And I say this as a guy who spent 3 years living in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I literally met a new Steeler fan like once a month. It was insane. So the fact that we're here for people from all over the country, I think is just fantastic. I didn't want to go too crazy. I want to put Jacob over for that reason. My answer is kind of like yours. By the time you look at a Derwin Gray, I'd probably look at a Tyrell Crosby. That's a guy you could probably get at a sizable discount as opposed to a Derwin Gray. Not to expect Derwin Gray to break the bank, but my point is you can probably get a pretty good discount deal on the Tyrell Crosby, and you're not going to pay a lot. It's not going to be a Chooks type deal where there's significant money that could be paid if he plays well, but if he does, you can kind of get out of jail free. Not that kind of deal. But if you can get Tyrell Crosby on an affordable 2-year deal, it makes that depth look a lot better. And not to mention the fact it's a guy that if one of those starting 5 get hurt, Tyrell Crosby can slot right in there. Pat Meyer, the offensive line coach, spoke with one of my colleagues, Richie Walsh from KDK TV. They did an interview at the offensive line camp that was here a couple weeks ago at Moon High School. And Pat Meyer said, look, you're not going to have your starting 5 guys in every game. It just does not happen. It's just one of the facts of the game. Someone's going to get banged up. You're going to have injuries, and there are going to be times you don't have your starting 5. So you got to have your backup guys ready to go. Like, you don't need 5. You probably need 7 or 8 because you're not going to have all 5 of your guys in every game. And that's something that stuck out with me. So a move for a guy like a Tyrell Crosby, or even if it is a Derwin Gray, if you can have 7, 8 guys that you now feel comfortable with, now you're looking at a group that, okay, things are going to go wrong. You can't really account for everything that's going to happen, and you can't predict it. And you know Mike Tomlin, he's not going to see comfort, and it's going to be next man up. Why not have it be a guy, whether it is a Tyrell Crosby or a Derwin Gray, an experienced guy who's still young and can step in and play in that swing tackle position? Because I honestly believe that is, if there's a priority that they should address going into training camp or during training camp, I do believe it's backup tackle and then maybe backup running back as number 2, but that's just for me.
I feel you there. And backup running back is something that we've talked about on the show. Dorian Dickerson talked about a week or two ago about that very position and them needing to go get certain guys, maybe a veteran like Jordan Howard. But offensive tackle needs to be a spot there. And again, this is what you can do. Mike Tomlin talked about this also on the Pivot podcast, saying a redistribution of playmaking, which doesn't always mean from the starters. Also means from the depth guys. You know, for years, the Steelers just look, this is all we can afford. We're going to put these guys out here. That was their thinking. And when you look at what their opportunities are now, still with the money that they have, they've added depth at edge rusher. They've added depth, on the defensive line. They've added depth to the wide receiver position. They have depth on the cornerback position, the safety position. There's a lot of different players that they're feeling, hey, really comfortable. Hey, if one guy goes down, this guy goes in. But
and I think that I don't want to cut you off, but I think that gets lost in the shuffle because everybody's like, why didn't they go get a better guy at this position? Well, they got 2 really capable guys at that position. If that guy goes down, you got a guy to slide in that probably plays close to the same level. Let's not discount that. Let's not discount, okay, maybe having higher value guy. Let's not discount having quality depth as not being as valuable. Because we just talked about Pat Meyer saying, hey, you may not have your starting 5 offensive linemen. You may not have your best 3 corners every week. You might need a guy that can slide in on a moment's notice and be ready to come up and play close to the level. So, yeah, it does come back around to, let's make sure there's depth at each position, and you can get to the argument between depth and quality depth, but let's have quality depth at each position. If you're Omar Khan and if you're Kevin Colbert addressing this offseason, which a lot of people are giving him bad marks for, I thought he rebuilt a lot of depth that was needed in a few different places. And he did it for pennies on the dollar. He did it at a fraction of the cost because he knew down the line they were going to have to pay Micah Fitzpatrick. He knew down the line you're probably going to have to pay Chris Boswell, which I expect to happen soon. He knew down the line you're probably going to have to pay Deontay Johnson, which may happen within the next year or so. All those things are important, but if you can build depth while still taking care of your top guys, if the lower part of your depth chart gets risen a little bit, if that level comes up behind your number 1 guys, now the overall group looks a lot better. That rising tide is going to lift all boats.
That's where I'm at, man. This is a chance. So, Jacob, to answer your question, they could bring back Derwin Gray, but I could see them bringing back someone else that they like even better, and they're just waiting for the chance to do that. And maybe they're even waiting for a team to kind of be tired of one of their sixth or seventh best offensive tackles, or someone that they feel like that wants more playing time and isn't getting it. So a lot of different options there available to the Steelers. Thanks for your question, Jacob. Thank you, dear listeners and viewers, for sticking with us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We hope you make us your first podcast every day to listen to or watch here on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, all the places. Josh, thanks for joining us here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Josh Taylor HD. That is the place to look for Facebook, for Twitter, for Instagram. If you want constant things from me and me picking my brain, you'll probably find it on Twitter. If you want a lot of pictures of me and my kid falling asleep on the couch or in the recliner chair, you'll probably find those on Instagram. But all the same, that's where you find me.
Absolutely. Do check Josh out. He's great at what he does, and we're glad to have him all the time here. Also, if you want to help out the Locked On Steelers podcast, go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment. Do both at the same time. You get a special shout out at the end of the show, like this person called Can't Watch Hockey, who gives us a 5-star review, says, best Steelers show hands down. Honestly, just a great show. You can listen to Steelers news and information without hot take garbage. Chris analyzes and breakdowns topics like no other in Pittsburgh. By far the most knowledgeable Steelers content, and it's really fun to listen to. Can't recommend this enough to actual fans. Thanks so much, Can't Watch Hockey on Apple Podcasts. Appreciate your 5-star review. If you want your shout out, you hit us with that 5-star review and your positive comment. We will get you we will read your shout out live here on the show. Thanks so much again for joining us, Josh. Thanks for listening to us. We'll be back tomorrow, finishing out the week. We look to have Jenna Harner. We're still working out some schedule things. We're hoping to have Jenna back on for another fun topic. We will see you then.